so we just have failed to do the work, and that leads us from one needless crisis to another. Now the crisis, of course, is the sequestration deadline. If you listen to the administration, you'd assume that this is the last day that it's safe to go outside, that starting tomorrow, terrible things are going to happen. I just heard our leader, the Republican leader, talk about our willingness to give the president of the other party more ability to direct these cuts in specific ways, but not forever. We need to take that responsibility back ourselves and appropriate the money that's going to be spent October 1. But between now and September the 30th, we need to make these reductions in the best way rather than the worst way. The Appropriations Committee that I'm the ranking Republican on has agriculture in it. One thing I'm going to ask the department is, what employees are supposed to show up on those days that are so dangerous that you say only the critical employees need to be here? And if they're supposed to be here in bad weather, why wouldn't they be here now? Why would you cut the employer who has the federal employee who has to show up at a food processing facility for anybody else to work, and have somebody in an office somewhere doing something that could be done the next day that's just dependent on them? If I was the president, I'd want to not be answering, why did you cut this and not cut that? Recently, the president had a series of press conferences. He embarked on a 100-city tour to warn Americans of the sequester. He showed up at Newport News, in Virginia. Almost exactly 1 year after three of my colleagues were down there, Senator Graham, Senator Ayotte, and Senator McCain, saying in a year this is going to be a big problem. A year later, the president shows up and says this is going to be a big problem. The president proposed the sequester in 2011. He insisted that it become law. He even threatened to veto a bill. He said, I'll veto any bill to replace the sequester late last year. And suddenly now he's changed his mind, and all these terrible things are going to happen, and it's unavoidable. It's only unavoidable if we refuse to cut things that can be cut. The federal government has grown 19% in its spending in the last 4 years. The sequester would cut 2.4 or 2.5%. So anybody in America whose budget has grown 19% in the last 2 years can go back not to where they were, the last 4 years rather, can go back not to where they were 3 years or 4 years ago, but just where they were a few months ago, and get your spending level back to that. This is a budget that has grown in a tremendous way, but now is suddenly uncuttable. We can't begin to get by with the money we were spending 6 or 9 or 12 months ago. Nobody believes that. And if we want to have this discussion, that's fine with me. These spending cuts need to happen. They should happen, and they should happen in the right way. This is not going to be solved by campaign appearances all over the country. It's going to be solved by good management to reach reasonable goals. The accounting office has identified 51 areas where programs are inefficient, ineffective, and overlapping. 51 areas. Now, why don't we deal with that? That's the executive's responsibility to say, here's how we're going to eliminate these programs that the government accounting office has said are inefficient, ineffective, and overlapping. Otherwise, I guess we're committed to keep the programs that are inefficient, ineffective, and overlapping, and spend billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. Those would include things like the 180 economic development programs operating in 5 different cabinet agencies. Now, I'm for economic development. I'm for opportunity and jobs, but do we need 180 different programs in 5 different agencies, or do we need divide 180 by 5? Do each of those agencies need an average of that many programs? There are 173 programs across 13 agencies to promote science, technology, engineering, and math education. Not a bad goal, but does it take 173 programs and 13 agencies to do it? 20 agencies oversee more than 50 financial literacy programs. More than 50 programs across 4 departments are there to support entrepreneurs. Private sector job creation should be the #1 domestic goal of the country today, but do you need 50 programs in 4 departments to encourage entrepreneurial skills? Probably not. So why don't we hear about that instead of the air traffic controllers and the highway engineers and the meat plant inspectors and the Head Start teachers? Why don't we hear about these programs that we all know are ready to be made more efficient, or in some cases just simply the way to make them more effective is to eliminate those programs. There are 47 job training programs in 9 agencies that cost $18 billion in fiscal year 2009. I don't have a number newer than that. We actually don't have a budget much newer than that. But $18 billion for 47 programs in 9 agencies, I'm sure, Mr. President, we could do better. The GAO found at least 37 duplicating investments in information technology. That was $1.2 billion over 5 years. 14 programs to administer grants to reduce diesel emissions across 3 departments. This is not 14 programs to administer grants and loans. This is 14 programs to administer grants and loans to reduce diesel emissions. I'm for reducing diesel emissions. I'm even for the federal government paying some attention to whether that's being done or not. But do we need 14 programs and 3 different agencies to do it? Across the board cutting, which is what sequester really means. It means we couldn't get to the number because, by the way, we didn't have a budget and we didn't appropriate any bills, so of course you're not going to get to the number. We couldn't get to the number that the law now requires us to not exceed in our spending, and so the cure for that is to cut every line item in the discretionary spending part of the budget, the part that defends the country, the part that builds highways, the part that administers most education needs that the federal government's involved in. That's what sequester is, and we can do better. The Department of Defense has spent more than $67 billion in the last 10 years on non-defense spending. Probably somebody better than the Department of Defense to do the non-defense work. The Department of Energy and Weatherization's program, which has received $5 billion in stimulus funds, $5 billion in stimulus funds, exhibited a failure rate of 80%. That stimulus program really worked out really well. Here's 80% failure rate in energy weatherization. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, the one that my friend, Secretary of Transportation, who I served with in the House, said that we'd have to eliminate air traffic controllers. They spent $500 million each year on consultants. Could be that it's more important that the air traffic controller show up than that the consultant show up. I've got a list here that I'm going to submit, Mr. President, on this because the list literally goes on and on. The Internal Revenue Service stored 22,486 items of unused furniture in a warehouse for an annual cost of $862,000. We'll have this discussion of why cut that instead of this if we want to, but my side is willing to give the President authority between now and the end of this haphazardly put together appropriating year to target cuts so that those of us in the Senate can appropriate the money for next year's spending. We ought to be moving right now. We shouldn't be having this debate at all today. We should be having a debate on the budget to have it done by April 15th so the Appropriation Committee could begin to do its work and we can find what needs to happen here. It's a good time to ask the question, is this a job for the government? And if the answer is yes, the second question is the federal government the best of all governments to solve this problem, or is there some government closer to people and closer to the problem that can solve it in a better way? Two things I want to submit for the record as I close my remarks here, Mr. President. One is a July 31, 2012 memo to agencies from the Office of Management and Budget that says agencies should continue normal spending operations since there are more than 5 months remain for Congress to act. On September the 28th, the same management organization, the Office of Management and Budget under the Executive Office of the President, sends another memo out that says agencies should continue normal spending and operations as instructed in the July 31 memo from the Office of Management and Budget to executive departments and agencies which address operational and other issues raised by the potential of January 2 sequestration. So the new spending year is about to begin in 2 days, in 2 days after this goes out, and the direction from the White House is business as usual, full speed ahead, spend money just like you are. Don't bother with that law that says that beginning in January 1, we have to spend less money. Well, we're going to spend less money, I'm convinced. I'm prepared to work with the President to see that we do that in the smartest possible way, but we have to get, Mr. President, our spending under control, and I look forward to seeing the Senate do its job, first with a budget, and then with bills that debate how we spend our money and what we spend our money on.